Now, let's get ready to walk in the light.
So, listen to this. It says, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. And it goes on, verse 2 all the way down to verse 8, and it lists the different times for this and time for that. But then it says in verse 11, and I like this. This is so powerful. It says God, talking about God, He has made everything beautiful in its time. You ever been, let's use a relationship, boyfriend and girlfriend. You ever been in a relationship before and you liked the person, you thought everything was right and it lined up and, seemed good to you in a sense, but it just something wasn't right down here in your spirit? Well, that's because it wasn't God, probably. But you can be in a relationship with someone and you're trying to get this person and you're trying to date that person, but it's not your time to get married. What do I mean by that? I mean that there's a specific time frame for everything God's called you to do. You got another time for what God's called you to do. Everything is made beautiful in its time. So listen, if you get to studying out the things of God, the purpose of God, you get to understanding your purpose, you must equally understand that God's timing is important. Think about the seed time and harvest. Think about planting a seed of potatoes and watching the harvest come up, or apples, or whatever fruit or vegetable or grass or anything you can think of. There's a time for that seed to be planted, for it to grow, germinate, and then produce a harvest. Pregnancy. A seed is fertilizing the egg. The woman becomes pregnant within the womb, but there's a time of pregnancy, I think maybe it's actually like 10 months that the whole thing takes place. And then after 9 months, that baby is birthed, or the time of delivery has taken place or is at hand. So there's timing in everything. And so it's important that we don't get ahead of God's timing, but we stay in tune to God's timing. That Kenneth E. Hagin, the same guy I was telling you about earlier, he made this statement. He said, I'd rather be behind God and have to catch up than to be so far out in front of God that He's nowhere to be found. And what did he mean by that? He means I would rather know that I know that what I'm stepping into is God than to just step out and look around and realize, oh man, this is a big Ishmael, or this is a big mess, and I really didn't need to be doing this in the first place. So it's better to have to catch up. God can redeem the time quicker than He can take you around the wilderness some 40 years to get you right back where you needed to be. All right? So listen to this. God's promise concerning destiny has a time frame. God's promise concerning destiny has a time frame. God's promise concerning destiny has a time frame. If you look in Genesis 15, and I'm going to be quick for sake of time, and you can go back and study this out. But Genesis 15:13, God and Abram are having this conversation. They go into covenant, and they start talking about some things, and God gives him promises and says, look, your seed's going to be great. You're going to have all these kids, and it's going to be awesome. My paraphrase. But He says, there's going to come a time where your descendants will be in slavery for, now listen, He says 400 years. God specifically said 400 years. He gave him a promise, and He said, at the end of 400 years, your kids or your descendants will be delivered. All right. Well, then he goes on, and it comes to Exodus chapter 2. Time has gone on. Abraham has died. All these Israelites have produced, or these Hebrews have produced more and more people. The population has grown. They have now ended up in slavery under Egyptian bondage. Well, in Exodus chapter 2, verse 23 through 25, it talks about that God began to hear their cry and their groanings, and it says God remembered His covenant. What covenant? The covenant He made with Abram, that He would deliver His people at 400 years. Well, you skip over to chapter 12 of Exodus, verse 40 through 41, and then it says that the deliverance, it became time for their deliverance. And I want to read this real quick. Exodus chapter 12, and starting in verse, let's see, what did I say? Chapter 12, verse 40. And it says, the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. Discrepancy? Perhaps. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on that very day, on that very same day, rather, it came to pass that all the armies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It says, after 430 years, on the very same day, the entire nation, the entire army of Israel left. 430 years. But yet in Genesis 15:13, God said after 400 years. So why is there a 30-year discrepancy in God's promise? He doesn't lie. Titus tells us that, right? Doesn't lie. So something's up. Why is there a 30-year discrepancy in the time God promised and the time that they were actually delivered? Why did God say 400 and it actually took 430 years? Well, your answer is found over here in Acts. When the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. It says when the time of the promise drew near. So God knew that that time was coming, right? And God swore to Abraham, and it says the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. Then another king arose who didn't know Joseph. He dealt bad with the people. Verse 20, it says at this time Moses was born. So Moses was born, God's set up to deliver his people. Remember, knowing your purpose is important, but knowing the timing is equally as important. So he was raised in his father's house for 3 months. He ended up in Pharaoh's daughter's care, and she took him, brought her up as his own son. Moses was learned in all the wisdom in Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. Kind of makes you wonder why he said, Lord, I stutter, when it says here he was mighty in words and deeds. Was he just giving God an excuse? I don't know. Verse 23, now when he was 40 years old, keep up with my math here. It came into his heart. Look, it came into his heart. The purpose for his life, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended and avenged him who was oppressed, and struck down the Egyptian. Verse 25. For he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand. But they did not understand. See, Moses knew his purpose of being Israel's deliverer. And he thought other people would know his purpose. Now, this is important. But it says, I did not understand. Listen, you may have something so great and big in your heart, but that does not mean your brothers or your people, your fellow Christians are going to understand that. That's okay. Keep it in your heart. And the next day he appeared to two of them as they were fighting and tried to reconcile them, saying, "Men, you are brothers. Why do you wrong one another?" But he who did his neighbor wrong pushed him away, saying, "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you did the Egyptian yesterday?" Then at this saying, Moses fled and became a dweller in the land of Midian, where he had 2 sons. Look at verse 30. They didn't understand. They rejected his purpose. Moses fled. 40 years had passed, verse 30, and an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame, told him, look, go back into Egypt. It's time for you to deliver your people. Look at the very last portion of verse 34. And it says, and now come, this is God speaking, and now come, I will send you to Egypt. Why did it take 430 years for children of Israel to get escape from bondage? Why? Well, let me tell you this, and I truly believe this. Moses stepped out too soon into his purpose. See, Andrew Womack said it like this. He could have spent 10 years in the palace, but instead he spent 40 years in the wilderness. Dare I say that Moses stepped out 10 years too soon. At 390 years of Egyptian bondage over the Israelites, Moses stepped out when he should have waited 10 more years to step out, and everything would have went smoothly. But because he stepped out too soon, he ended up fleeing into the wilderness. And it cost him 40 years. Now God redeemed him. He blessed him. He brought him back. And at 40 years, 30 years past the time of the children of Israel's bondage, guess what happened? God sent Moses. And y'all know the story. They were delivered. So God promised 400 years, but it took 430 for the day of deliverance. Why? Moses was in the wilderness 40 years, and then he stepped out too soon. When we step out too soon into what God has called us, we can delay years of our destiny. Does not mean you will not fulfill your destiny. But I dare say it could delay you accomplishing the thing that God's called you to do. You'll still accomplish it. But what can be prevented by you simply being patient, resting, waiting until God says go? So stay plugged up where you go. Plug up in your church. Usher, serve, worship, do what you need to do where God's planted you. Bloom where you're planted. And then when the time is right God will say, okay, now come, I'm going to send you here. Now come, now's the time to step out into your own ministry. Now come, now is the time to start that business. Why do many people start a business, fail, start a business, fail, start a business, fail? Perhaps their timing was off. Not that they're not called to business, but their timing could be off. You got to listen to the Holy Spirit as to what He's speaking to you. It may be your time to go now. Maybe you've been delaying, and now God's saying go. That's where listening and tuning your ear to the Holy Spirit comes in and saying, hey, okay, God, is it my time? Yeah, it's your time. Go. Or, hey, God, is it my time? Nope. I need you to wait. I gotta arrange some things. So don't delay your purpose. Listen to God. Find out the timing. Your plan, or God's plan for your life, rather, will still come to pass if you simply obey what He asked you to do. But you must remember this: timing is everything. God bless you. I'm Zachary Bigley. Thank you for watching Walking in the Light, and I trust that your time is at hand. Have a great day. God bless you.